On August 16, 1988, the last one rolled off the line. Not with a bang, not with a ceremony, with silence. And that silence has haunted American car lovers ever since. Imagine you're a young engineer. You have an idea. You see something the suits upstairs don't see. You see an opportunity hiding inside the crisis. If people have to drive small, economical cars, why can't those cars be exciting? Why can't they be beautiful? Why can't they feel, just for a moment, like something special? That idea, that rebellious, beautiful, stubborn idea, is where the Pontiac Fiero was born. The man-child thing. They already had a two-seater sports car, the Corvette. And the Corvette was the crown jewel of the American automobile industry. Nobody at the top of that corporate ladder wanted a second two-seater that might steal the Corvette's thunder. They'd seen what happened when divisions competed with each other internally. It got messy. It got political. It cost money. So Aldikacti's team did something crafty. Something almost sneaky. They didn't pitch it as a sports car. They pitched it as a commuter car. A fuel-efficient, two-seat, four-cylinder commuter car that just happened to look like something you'd see on a racetrack in Italy. See, GM was under pressure to meet something called CAFE standards, the corporate average fuel economy requirements that the federal government had imposed. Every car maker had to hit a fleet-wide average miles per gallon number. And GM was struggling. They needed fuel-efficient cars in their lineup, and they needed them fast. Aldikacti's commuter car checked all those boxes. Low weight, four-cylinder engine, great fuel economy. The fact that it also looked like a dream and handled like it had something to prove, well, that was just a bonus. When Aldikacti's team came back with a running prototype in less than 6 months, General Motors said yes. The Fiero was on. But getting a green light from GM wasn't the end of the battle. It was just the beginning of a different kind of war. Here's something you need to understand about how GM worked in those days. They had two completely separate teams of engineers. On one side, the design engineers, the dreamers, the people who drew up the blueprints of what a car should be. On the other side, the manufacturing engineers, the practical guys who had to actually figure out how to build the thing. And these two groups barely talked to each other. The blueprints would go from design to manufacturing. Manufacturing would say, can't be done. Blueprints would go back. Design would revise. Manufacturing would say, still can't be done. Back and forth. Back and forth. It was a bureaucratic tennis match that wasted months and millions of dollars. Aldikacti had zero patience for it. He forced both teams to sit side by side. No more excuses. No more no build after the blueprints are done. You're going to talk to each other like adults and you're going to figure this out together. It was unorthodox. It was uncomfortable. And it worked. But the compromises came fast and they came hard. Aldikacti had dreamed of plastic body panels, lightweight, innovative, ahead of their time. The dies for metal panels were cheaper, so metal it was. He dreamed of a brand new, high-performance aluminum block V6 engine, something that would make this car truly sing. But developing a new engine from scratch would cost more than the entire rest of the car's production budget combined. So that dream died on the accountant's desk. Instead, the Fiero got GM's existing four-cylinder engine, the 2.5-liter Iron Duke. A name that tells you everything you need to know about it. Heavy, reliable, unspectacular. The kind of engine that got you to work and back without complaint, but didn't exactly inspire poetry. Here's the thing though, and this is what makes the Fiero story so fascinating. Despite all those compromises, the fundamental architecture of this car was genuinely revolutionary. Mid-engine layout. Think about that for a second. Every serious European sports car, your Ferraris, your Lamborghinis, your Lotus, they put the engine in the middle of the car behind the driver, in front of the rear axle.
Why?
Because it gives you perfect weight distribution, better handling, better traction, better balance in the corners. The Pontiac Fiero was the first mass-produced, rear mid-engine car ever made by an American manufacturer. Not bad for a commuter car. The chassis itself was something genuinely new as well. Non-load-bearing composite body panels, meaning the body of the car wasn't actually holding anything together structurally. Instead, The car had a space frame, a kind of internal skeleton, and the body panels just clipped onto it, like a suit of armor over a steel warrior. This wasn't just cool engineering. This was practical. It meant that if you dented a panel, you didn't have to repair it. You just replaced it. It meant the car was lighter than it would otherwise be. And it meant that, theoretically, you could completely change what the car looked like just by swapping out the body panels. That last detail would become very important later. May 1984. The Indianapolis 500, the most famous race in America, and leading the entire field of 33 of the most powerful racing machines on the planet is a Pontiac Fiero. The Fiero 2 M4 had been named the official pace car of the Indianapolis 500 for 1984. And this wasn't just a ceremonial honor. They actually ran a specially prepared Fiero out in front of the field. This little four-cylinder, mid-engine machine from Pontiac, Michigan, the car that had been sold to corporate executives as an economy commuter, was leading the Indianapolis 500. The actual pace cars used for the race were fitted with a special engine, a 2.7-liter Super Duty four-cylinder that put out 232 horsepower and pushed the car past 138 miles per hour on the oval. John Callies, the factory's lead engineer on both the pace car and racing programs, was at the wheel. And back home at the dealerships, the public was going absolutely insane. In 1984, Pontiac's factory ran 3 full shifts, morning, afternoon, and night, 7 days a week. And they still couldn't keep up with demand. They'd initially estimated they'd sell maybe 80,000 units in the first year. They blew past that number by 28,000 cars. Total 1984 production hit 136,840 units. That year, Car and Driver magazine put the Fiero 2 M4 on their prestigious 10 best list. Not the 10 best sports cars. The 10 best cars. Full stop. Period. In showrooms, it was selling for $7,999 for the base model and $9,599 for the top-spec SE. In today's money, that's roughly $26,000 to $30,000. A genuinely accessible, genuinely exciting sports car for regular Americans. And the marketing? Pontiac went all out. They sponsored one of the biggest concert tours in America, Daryl Hall and John Oates on the Big Bam Boom Tour. Every arena had Fiero banners above the stage. New Fieros on display in the lobby. Dealer ticket giveaways. Hall and Oates posed with a red 1984 Fiero SE for a special limited vinyl album sent to Pontiac sales managers. It was cool. It felt cool. America thought it was cool. For one brief, shining moment in 1984, Pontiac had captured lightning in a bottle. But lightning in a bottle has a way of burning your hands if you're not careful. As the initial euphoria faded, the reality started to show. The Fiero had been built on a tight budget, with compromises stacked on compromises. And some of those compromises were starting to come due. The suspension and brakes had been borrowed from other GM platforms, the X platform and T platform cars. Practical Oldsmobiles. Front-wheel drive economy cars. These were not the components of a sports car. The rear suspension was essentially the same setup used in the Pontiac Phoenix. The tires were narrow. The brakes were adequate at best. Here you had this gorgeous, low-slung, mid-engine car that looked like it was ready to embarrass Ferraris, and underneath, it handled only about as well as a sporty coupe of the era. Not badly, but not extraordinarily either. And given what the car looked like, given the expectations the mid-engine layout raised, that gap between promise and performance hit some buyers hard. There were also early reliability concerns. Engine compartment fires were reported in some early 1984 models, an issue tied to an oil leak in the 2.5-liter engine that could drip onto hot exhaust components. GM addressed it with a recall and a fix, but the story got out. In an era before the internet could amplify everything, the damage was more contained. But it still stung. Sales began to slide. 136,000 cars in 1984, down to 76,000 in 1985, down again in 1986, and further still in 1987. Pontiac was facing a credibility crisis. The car had promised the world and delivered, most of it. But most of it in the sports car world isn't always enough. Meanwhile, something fascinating was happening in the Fiero's shadow. Because those composite, swappable body panels? Turns out the aftermarket community had noticed that little detail. Starting with a 1987 model year, Pontiac dealers actually offered a factory option called the Fiero Mera, a conversion that replaced the standard Fiero body with one styled after the Pininfarina Ferrari 308. The transformation work was done by a company called Corporate Concepts. Only 247 Meras were ever produced before Ferrari's lawyers showed up, which, honestly, speaks more to how convincing the transformation was than anything else. Here's the part of the Fiero story that will break your heart. Because by 1988, the Pontiac Fiero had finally become the car it was always supposed to be. The engineers had spent years learning from the car's limitations and the racing program. By 1988, they completely redesigned the suspension. Up front, revised control arms and knuckles that dramatically reduced steering effort and improved the scrub radius. At the rear, a completely new tri-link suspension with all new knuckles. Staggered wheel sizes, 15-inch wheels front and rear, but wider in the back for improved handling balance. And vented disc brakes at all four corners. Finally, the 1988 Fiero suspension was so sophisticated that automotive journalists kept calling it Lotus-like. Some suspected that GM, which had acquired a 91% stake in Lotus in late 1986, had quietly let some Lotus expertise filter into the Fiero's redesign. Pontiac engineers always denied it, but they acknowledged that some inspiration might have traveled between the two companies. Road testers who had criticized the earlier Fieros for not living up to their mid-engine promise were now eating their words. The 1988 Fiero GT was a genuinely great sports car. Not a good car. Not a decent car. A great car. And a new formula package gave buyers the GT's performance hardware in the standard coupe body for people who wanted the performance without the fastback styling. And on the horizon, things were even more exciting. Engineers were working on plans for a 1989 and 1990 Fiero that would have been nothing short of spectacular. A 190 horsepower DOHC quad-4 four-cylinder as the base engine. A 200-plus horsepower DOHC V6 in the GT models. Maybe even a turbocharged Buick V6 variant. One prototype, the single 1989/1990 Fiero GT prototype that still exists today, carried an early version of the DOHC V6 that would eventually go into the Grand Prix and Lumina Z34 in the early 90s. That engine made over 200 horsepower. Imagine a mid-engine American sports car with 200 horsepower, assorted chassis, perfect weight distribution, and a price tag accessible to regular Americans. On August 16, 1988, the last Pontiac Fiero was assembled in Pontiac, Michigan. Sales had been declining for 4 years, and General Motors made the call. The plant would close. The car would end. The 1989 and 1990 prototypes, those tantalizing glimpses of what could have been, would be shelved. Most were eventually destroyed. Some ended up demolished in a scrapyard in Australia. Let that sink in for a moment. The car that had finally gotten it right. The car that was on the verge of something truly great. Gone. The very last Fiero built was given to a GM assembly worker. He kept it pristine, barely drove it just over 500 miles on the odometer when it was eventually sold. In December of 2020, that final Fiero sold at auction for $90,000. $90,000 for a car that started at under $8,000. The market had its own way of telling you something. In 5 model years, Pontiac built 370,168 Fieros. That's not a small number. That's not a failure, not in raw production terms. But the car had arrived as a compromise, been handicapped by budget cuts, been burdened by expectations it wasn't yet equipped to meet, and been discontinued just as it finally shed all those limitations. IT is one of the great what-ifs of American automotive history. What if GM had given it one more year? What if the 1989 Fiero with that DOHC engine and that perfected chassis had made it to showrooms? What if American buyers had gotten the chance to experience what the Pontiac engineers always knew this car could be? Here's what's remarkable. The Fiero never really died. Today, the Fiero community is one of the most passionate, most dedicated, most creative enthusiast communities in all of classic American car culture. Because those composite body panels, the same panels that were a cost compromise in 1984, turned out to be a gift to the aftermarket. You can buy a Fiero today and fit it with a Northstar V8, a GM LS engine, a turbocharged four-cylinder that makes the original Iron Duke look like a riding lawnmower. The mid-engine layout that the factory never fully exploited? Enthusiasts have exploited it completely. There are Fieros out there running low, 12 second quarter miles. Fieros that handle with the precision of a purpose-built track car. And those swappable body panels? The aftermarket has had a field day. From faithful restorations to wild custom shapes, the Fiero's modular construction means that the base car has been reimagined in hundreds of ways. The car that Hulki Aldikacti fought for. The car that William Hoagland protected from cancellation 3 times. The car that workers on the factory floor were allowed to name, because management wanted to prove that cooperation between labor and management worked. The word Fiero means fierce, bold, proud, wild. It means, in Italian and Spanish, something that refuses to be tamed. The men and women who built it, the engineers who fought for it, the workers who assembled it, the buyers who loved it, they deserved a longer story. They deserved to see what that car could have become. But maybe that's what makes it linger. Maybe that's what makes the Fiero special. Some cars are remembered because they were perfect. And some cars are remembered because they were almost perfect, and that word almost is the most haunting word in the English language. The Pontiac Fiero was almost the greatest American sports car ever made. If you've got a Fiero in your garage, or if you've always wanted one, drop it in the comments below. This community deserves to hear your story. Thanks for watching. And as always, keep the dream alive.